everybody, and welcome to ToRAISE Questions, the To Labor Doula podcast. Hi, Thérèse.
Hey, Sarah. How are you?
I'm good. This is Thérèse Hakoun. She's executive director of To Labor, which is a national doula training and certification organization. And I'm Sarah Allen Short. I work with To Labor, and I'm a doula. And we do this little podcast.
Yes, we do.
So, tell me a little bit about, before we get started, I wanted to thank everybody. We've had a couple of people promote the podcast in doula groups. And it really, like doula groups on Facebook and LinkedIn and stuff. And it really helps us when you do that. And so I'd like to encourage you, if you participate, there's got to be like a dozen or more Facebook groups for doulas now.
Yeah, absolutely.
With very different tone and tenor. Different topics. Some of them are, all about one thing or another. Some of them, anyway, I mean, there's like everything. There's doula groups for, anyway, I'm not even going to get into it, but there's all kinds of doula groups. If you aren't a member of any, you should consider joining some because it can be a good place to get some information. But if you are a member of one and something's coming up and people are saying like, hey, I just don't know what I should do about this, working with this VBAC patient or whatever, we would love it if you just would mention, check out episode 22 of the To Labor podcast.
Right. And what I'm hearing, Sarah, when I go teach workshops or just out there, that how many people really are listening and really referring to the podcast and what we're discussing, and input from, some of the speakers that we've had, just how really valuable it is. And I see it also as continuing education.
Right.
Because no one workshop can ever cover everything.
Well, and it's funny. I think on our last episode, or maybe the one before that, we were like, we have so many listeners. Everybody's listening to us. It's so great. And I was thinking about, I was afraid that sounded vain. And, what I really wanted to say is, excuse me, it's more important than ever that we get your feedback on what you like and you don't like. Do you like little tips at the beginning? Do you like little stories about related things? Or do you not? Do you find that distracting? Do you like really practical stuff? Do you like the more spiritual side of doula work? Do you like all of it? Do you like a mix? Do you like guests? Do you like interviews, questions, case studies? We love that feedback. We can tell from our downloads that you guys really like case studies because they have a lot of downloads, and we can tell that certain topics are of interest. But yeah, give us feedback. You can email toraisequestions@gmail.com. That's TORAISE questions@gmail.com. Or you can leave it on our Facebook page, To Labor. Please follow us on To Labor. We're doing a lot of cool stuff with our page now. We have hired a social media helper. And she's awesome. Her name is Grace, and she's doing a great job. So we're putting a lot more articles out there, a lot more resources. These are all things you can share with your clients, and that you may learn from. But so the point is we feel like we are a good resource from the feedback we're getting, but we want to continue to address the topics you're interested in. Right?
Absolutely.
So here's what I want to talk about today. Here's what I think we should talk about today.
Okay.
I think we should talk about what happens when your client is not happy with you after the entire experience is over. And I thought about this because I saw, a colleague called me recently and said, I had this birth that I thought went great, but she's pregnant again, and she's not hiring me. She's hiring somebody else, and I have no idea.
Oh, that's interesting.
What happened. I don't know if if something went wrong, and I just don't know. But it really hurt her feelings, and she was, sort of asking, what did I think about this?
Right.
And it just got me thinking that so many of us develop such close relationships with our clients, and it doesn't always turn out great. It doesn't. There can be clients that blame you for things that are not your fault or that are unfair, or something can legitimately go wrong where you make a mistake or you overstep bounds or understep bounds, and you really do make a mistake that they legitimately have a beef about. And so that's what I think I want to talk about today.
I think it's a really good topic, and I think it's a worry. It's a question that actually comes up in workshops often, that participants will say, well, what if I have a client, or they'll ask me, have you ever had a client who wasn't happy with, how things turned out, and blame you for that circumstance? Or what if I get blamed for something at the end of the birth. And so it is something we can talk about.
I think we're going to leave aside the issue of legal liability for this episode. And if that's something y'all are interested in, we could have somebody on to talk about that.
Right.
There could be certain situations where you have legal liability, but that's not really our focus.
This is more the emotional.
This is more a client that thinks you made a mistake or did something wrong or abandoned them or whatever.
And, I have, Sarah, and I go around the country a lot, so I hear a lot of stories. And during workshops or after workshops, participants will contact me about experiences that they have had, just to kind of have that safe place to discuss it instead of putting it out maybe to their own community. I kind of become that deposit area.
Right. Well, I think it's embarrassing sometimes to tell.
Yeah, maybe it's embarrassing. I guess you're right. I think you're probably right. I try not to. My whole focus with them is not to feel that way.
Right.
So I don't even think to address it directly, like, don't be embarrassed by this. But I think that you're probably right. There's a question of how will other people view me if I tell this story, because maybe I am to blame. And that's a real worry. Is that this mother, this person, this client might tell people. It's like anything, if one bad, it's what I say at workshop, one bad doula spoils it for the rest of everyone. It doesn't matter if all the other doulas that come in behind you are great. It's that if you screw up, then the word goes out there and it just becomes this message. So that is always the worry. If the mother is wanting to tell her story and blames the doula, then it is hard. But I always think, I had this conversation with somebody recently in regard to this topic, which is one of the reasons we decided to talk about it, is that worry. How often, or will her name be associated as a bad doula as a result of this client's experience? And the only thing we can hope for that is that she is just one of so many clients that, in particular, specifically with this person, who has had really good experiences with the rest of her clients. And some people will hear it and will not choose to hire her because of that one story. But most people will never hear that story. And they'll meet that doula and choose to have her because they relate to her. Somewhere along the line, also, what I always want the doula who's feeling blamed to remember that this is why it's important to feel that connection to the client when you're interviewing. The client is interviewing you, but you are interviewing the client at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's where there's that fine line, especially for people who are starting out new and just want to do any birth and every birth. You still have to be very thoughtful about who you're taking on. Don't take a birth just because you want to do a birth. Take a birth
because it's a good fit for you, as well as them choosing you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes it doesn't guarantee by any means that the end result is going to be perfect and everybody's going to walk away happy no matter what the circumstances are. But you increase your probability of that instead of just saying, yes, choose me.
Yeah. I think I told you about a situation I had where I was interviewed by a client who basically told me everybody who had done her wrong at every stage of everything. And, her first two children. She had two children. She was pregnant with her third, and different doctors, different doulas for each of her first two births. And she was telling me about how awful they were. And I was sort of, at the very beginning of the conversation, I was thinking, oh, this poor woman. Because, if you've been a doula for 5 minutes, you've heard stories of women being mistreated by the obstetrical system in the United States. It's not a stretch. But then I started to think,
what's the common denominator here?
Right. Is it, yes, it's definitely possible that you had 2 terrible doctors and 2 terrible
Right.
doulas and you were just unlucky. But it's also possible that you have some expectation that
Right.
someone's going to rescue you from
Right.
someone. So that, I think that's what you mean is partially about interviewing is, getting that connection. So so what kind of stories do you hear?
Well, I can tell you a few of them.
Or if you want to share a personal story, or if you want to share stories you've heard from women on the road or doulas on the road. Yeah,
it's really people on the road. For instance, here's one.
Okay.
The woman, the doula, was hired and felt like a good connection with the client. Did all the prenatal. Everything was great. Woman was in labor, communicating with the doula via the telephone, some texting, but mainly talking on the telephone. The primary care provider was a midwife. So the doula was making sure also that to remind the client not just to be calling her, the doula, but also to be calling the midwife to check in with her about how labor was progressing. And trusting that was occurring. And then labor just kept progressing, but nothing very significant. And the midwife herself had said, call me when things get really intense, when you can't handle it any further. And the doula took that as also good information for herself to hear. That the primary care provider themselves was feeling that the woman was still doing okay at home. Anyway, the long and short of it is that the doula gets a call from the family, and the woman is actually birthing. She's at home. And she feels that the baby's coming. And the doula's not there, nor is there an ability to get in the car, obviously.
Was this a planned home birth?
No.
Okay, planned hospital
birth with the midwife. And so she, told them to call 911, and I can't remember exactly if she told them to call the primary care provider as well, but probably so. And she said, I'll come also. And she got in her car and drove to the house, and the rescue squad had come, and the baby had been born, and everything was okay. But it wasn't a plan.
Right.
It wasn't a plan, and it all happened very fast. But nobody was. The baby was totally fine. The mom was fine, and the family was transported to a hospital. Okay. Not the hospital, though, where they had planned to birth, where the midwife was, because I believe something to do with the rescue squad not wanting to take them there, and the mother just acquiescing, just saying, that's fine, just take me wherever. Anyway, the doula did follow through with this family just like she would have done any other birth. Felt like, though this wasn't the circumstances that they wanted to have, it was out of everybody's control. There wasn't anything that alerted her, because she told me, because my question to her was, well, what do you think your role was in this? Could you have done something different? And she said she did a really close introspection and review of it, and she feels like in hindsight she maybe could see, only because of hindsight, because of the end result,
right,
that this woman was closer to having the baby than she knew. But the woman herself wasn't giving that information. She wasn't saying, I think it's time for me to go to the hospital. Which is what we're also waiting for. What else do we know? And there wasn't the sound. She wasn't saying the contractions were close together, really close together, whatever this. And the midwife herself was not encouraging the woman to come in. So her feeling was that she hadn't done anything wrong, that it was just one of those births that happens sometimes in that manner, and you get caught off guard and the baby gets born, and it's not your ideal, but nobody's to blame.
Right.
It's just life. But in the end, what happened was that even in the immediate postpartum, a lot of questions started arising from the family and from the primary care provider, like how did this happen, and conversations with the doula and trying to figure things out. But the doula started feeling like there was a lot of miscommunication and a lot of misinformation that was occurring. And she hadn't just communicated with the woman, she had communicated with the partner as well and with the woman. So there was the different perspectives going on about what was happening. But she kind of started feeling like she was already being made to be responsible for some of the things that the baby had been born at home. And she felt really torn because she did not feel like she was responsible for the baby being born at home. And, I only heard her story.
Sure.
But from my perspective, I have to say, nobody was to blame. I mean, there was to begin with, I don't think blame even is a word that should have, been in the sentence.
I think the thing that's interesting is if a doula, that's a big if a doula is practicing within scope.
Right.
She is not making any decisions. She's not making any calls. And so it's almost impossible
exactly
to blame her. Now, if she was overstepping her bounds.
Right, which is something I really checked in with because you know how strongly I feel about that.
And again, like you said, you only heard her side of the story.
Right.
You don't know. But, if she was giving the people options, the mother and the partner options and choices the whole way and not making any. Now, if she was saying, don't go to the hospital.
Yeah, which I asked. I said, did you ever say, was she saying, I think maybe I should go in, and were you saying, no, I don't think you should go? Because, why I asked that
People
question?
do that all the time.
They do, and it's so troublesome to me.
I think I've said this before. The way that I was introduced to doulas was a friend of mine who told me about how she had this doula she loved, she thought was awesome, who told her to lie about when her water broke and told her not to go to the hospital when the doctor told her to. And she was telling me this story. I'd never even heard of doulas as like this woman who protected me from all these things. Right. And I at the time thought
I didn't know any better.
Right. What I think now is, well, it's sure lucky that turned out right. Because if you got an infection, because you had ruptured fluids for 48 hours and your doula told you not to go, or if you delivered the baby in the car because your doula said don't go yet. But so as far as you know from this story, this doula wasn't saying. So I mean, so was the doula asking you for specific advice, or was she just sort of running this by you?
Originally I was a running by person.
Yeah.
And I think our conversation revealed to me, because I was listening very intently to, was there, quote, any reason for this doula to be, quote unquote, blamed? And again, I don't think blame played in this, but I had to look at it from that perspective. And from what I could tell, no. I mean, this was in the end, the responsibility and the choice fell on the mother and the partner to make the decision to go. And so, I think in my conversation with the doula, she herself, though it irked her, it was there inside of her. It was tweaking her periodically, bothering her. She knew in herself that she really hadn't done anything. And, she just went on. She didn't say to the clients, I think you're wrong. I think you're wrong. She kind of became a little bit of the blame taker without really taking full. I think it was a balancing act. She helped them remember what the conversations were, but she wasn't trying to defend herself. She was just helping them see all sides of the story. And it seemed like they understood that too, because there were moments I remember the doula saying, she said to them, well, do you remember this is what happened? And then did you do this? And then they were like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Or they're like, oh yeah, that's right. So she was helping them, a woman in labor and the partner, they don't remember everything as clearly sometimes as the doula does. But what was interesting to me was that a couple months later, the doula contacted me again because she needed to talk about it again, which didn't totally surprise me because those things can just bother us, even though we should learn to let them go.
This is one of your returning students. Okay.
I mean, this is somebody I taught,
right?
And some and who had already been doing doula work, and so she.
So this was this wasn't a brand new doula.
No,
that
she had experience.
Had just taken the workshop and did this her first time or whatever.
Right.
That would be hard.
Yeah, good clarification as well. And so but I was wrong that the reason she was calling me was that time had passed and the client had called her and said, I really need to talk to you about my birth. And the doula said, oh, great, let's get together. And they met. And without going into all the details, the mother ended up feeling very traumatized by the birth, that the baby being born at home had actually been a trauma, and that she actually had been in counseling, which was a good thing, because if you think you have trauma, a good place to go is to get some professional help to help you get past that trauma. So that was good to hear that that's what she had done. But she was traumatized by the experience, and she felt the need with encouragement from the counselor to meet with the doula again to discuss the doula's role. And what came really out in the story was that she really did blame the doula. She really felt like the doula had failed them, and that the trauma she had experienced would not have occurred if the doula had somehow known to tell them to go to the hospital before the baby came. Mm-hmm. And it was very upsetting to the doula to hear this conversation.
Sure.
And so my first question was like, well, how did you respond back? And she said, well, of course I wanted to defend myself, like, this is crazy. And also, what's the trauma? This doula wasn't saying that trauma doesn't exist. It was, when did it cross into trauma?
Right.
Because her last communications with her, which was about a month out after the baby was born, those words were never there. So
right.
She was really like, when did it suddenly become a trauma? Yes, it was an unexpected event, but it wasn't traumatic. And somewhere along the line, whether it was through her midwife care or other people or being on the internet, this woman decided that she could have died and the baby could have died. Mm-hmm. And she became terrified of that thought inside of her, that she had really been in a really risky situation, even though she didn't know that at the time, didn't feel it immediately after. Now she did, somewhere along the line, caused by extenuating circumstances, and she needed help, and she needed to talk to the doula about it. And her counselor's advice was to have this meeting to get some kind of closure on it. And
so and we just talked about this in a recent episode, trauma is in the eye of the beholder.
Absolutely.
And perception is reality.
And that's why the doula wasn't arguing the trauma.
Which is hard. I mean,
right.
We've all been in situations where, I think we talked about this in a very recent episode, where someone the last episode where we were talking about birth outcomes, mm-hmm. when someone's telling you how difficult mm-hmm. and terrible their birth was, and you were like, I was there, it didn't look like that. Right. And you have to honor their experience.
Exactly.
And vice versa. My birth was awesome and you were there and you didn't think it was. So trauma's in the eye of the beholder, right. Difficulties in the eye of the beholder. But you also, now what I think is interesting, and I want to talk more about either about this story or just in general, is that you actually asked, it sounds like you first explored with the doula, well, what was your actual role? Mm-hmm. Because I think as doulas, we could be prejudiced towards doulas.
Absolutely.
And you hear a story and you hear something went wrong and someone's mad at a doula and you think, oh,
no way doula did anything wrong.
Right. The woman's crazy.
But I've been around too long.
Yeah. Or the partner is, it's there's a number of issues, mm-hmm. but the doula did everything right. And what one of the things I wanted to talk about in this episode is that balance between, you have to really be able to sit with, if you are a doula listening and you've had a time when a client is, something's wrong. Mm-hmm. They're angry with you. They're upset with you. They go dark all of a sudden. You don't know why. They don't hire you for a second birth. You have to be able to sit with the possibility that you
had some responsibility.
Mm-hmm. That if you were mentioning before we talked that something you hear about is clients feeling abandoned by doulas, mm-hmm. and that sometimes the client has a need that can't be met. The doula could call them every day and visit every day and it wouldn't be enough. But sometimes the doula drops the ball. Sometimes the doula doesn't do good follow-up, or, misses a birth because they were overscheduled or they didn't have their phone on or something. So you have to be able to sit with that possibility that you messed up. You have to be able to sit with the possibility that someone doesn't like you and that you can't fix it. Mm-hmm. You have to learn from, I still learn from every birth I go to. I think, what would I have done differently? What could I have done differently?
And that's what we should do after every birth.
It's a fine line, though, between beating yourself mm-hmm. up and just looking at it like,
And beating yourself up and thinking you're infallible.
Yeah.
Because that's why I chuckled before about I've been around too long, because I've heard doulas sometimes their stories and I'm shocked. I really am. Like, I think, well, you didn't give the quality of care there, because you really thought you did kind of drop the ball. Mm-hmm. You didn't, to me, our job is not to decide when somebody does something or doesn't do something. Our job is to never let that safe space around them ever lapse.
Well, and so part of it is, which we say in like every single episode, explaining that in the prenatals so that they have a clear mm-hmm. understanding of what your boundary is. I think about a doula I talked to who had a client who heavy labor, but like not transition-y, just, contractions. It was a first baby. Contractions were very hard and like 6 minutes apart, for usually that means you have a really long time. And she didn't talk to the client for like 5 hours. She checked in once or twice by text, didn't hear anything back, figured maybe it had slowed down or the client was asleep or something. Well, anyway, the client had the baby and was mad at her that she wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And she was saying, ToRAISE always says I should call. You should call, and like midwives are supposed to call. And so is it my fault that I didn't call, or is it their fault because they didn't call me? And again, it's getting back to what you said about blame is not really in this situation. Mm-hmm. I would say if you have prepared your client, they can't expect you to be a mind reader. She checked in by text. Should she have called? Maybe she should have called.
Well, I think that's where I do think calling.
You think she should have called, but I understand.
And I'm not saying that
she texted and she thought maybe they were asleep.
She could have called and they didn't answer the phone. Mm-hmm. But at least with to me, it's just more the telephone. Because you have more people are more likely to communicate what they're really going through by the phone.
To me, in that situation, I don't understand how the client can blame her for not being there.
And so, can I just finish this story also? Because
go ahead.
It's relevant to what you're saying right at the moment. In the end, what happened with this woman and the client is the client actually asked the doula because you're right. I don't want to think a doula has done something wrong, mm-hmm. but I think I'm kind of the opposite. I almost think from that point of view, like maybe the doula did something wrong. Mm-hmm. I'm always looking on the other mm-hmm. side. So
I think if you're going to give good advice, you have to.
Well, you do have to look all the way around the story.
And you get a lot of people coming to you.
I do for that kind of insight.
And probably people don't come to you when they're like, "Hey, I just had this awesome birth and everybody loves me."
Yeah, it's not as often.
It's probably like, something went wrong.
So the doula was explaining to me, and I trusted that this was true, that she was not defending herself, but she was not going to allow that woman to actually blame her, not let her fully rest the responsibility on her, because she said to me, I did make it so clear. I am not the, prenatally and throughout the entire labor, I am not the person who's responsible for your choices. That it was a clear communication. There was no miscommunication. And that, to take the step back for a second, it is the same old thing that I say all the time, but it's so important. That communication prenatally with your clients about what your role is. And for doulas, I say this, and I say it with lots of love and respect to doulas, not to get anybody angry, but you cannot have your clients trusting you more than they trust themselves. And it's a hard thing not to have happen, but it's really important that you have that kind of as a mantra in your head. They have to trust themselves more than me. And doulas also have to, this is a whole nother topic I thought we could have, is truly the role of a doula. What is the role of a doula? And as I just mentioned, to me, our role is to help create that safe space around that person so that they can trust themselves to make the decisions. So in the end, the doula was asked by the mom, well, would you do anything different? Which I thought was an interesting question. If you had it to do over again, in other words, I don't know her exact words, would you do something different? And the doula honestly said she had two choices at that moment. She could tell the truth or she could fudge the truth. And she chose to tell the truth, which was, I don't feel I would do anything different. I think that this was the birth that happened, and it wasn't what any of us expected, but I don't think that I did anything wrong, you did anything wrong, your midwife did anything wrong. I think this is just the experience that occurred. Which is
probably not what the mom wanted to hear.
Well, and the mom was not happy with that response. She told the doula, I'm sorry to hear that. I would at least hope that you would have a different perspective. And that was really the final nail for the doula. It really took her down, because she was like, well, now I have to carry the responsibility of this woman's pain inside of me. And that's what hurt me for the doula, was that woman, traumatized as she was, and as we already said, not questioning her trauma, it was real, period. How and when, how it happened, it was real to her. She was now giving that trauma to the doula, and the doula now has some trauma around that, because it's like, well, shoot, how can I do my job if I was doing my job? How do I do my job and not worry that that's going to happen again or again? I trusted these people. I thought they trusted me.
I wonder if she told her next 3 clients to go to the hospital too early.
Well, that's it. You wonder how, and
not that she should have been telling anybody to do anything.
No, but that's what happens, and that's what we do need to do. But so what?
Let me ask you, what should she have done? So, I mean, if you have a range of options, should she say to this woman, I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry you had a bad experience. I'm sorry you're angry at me, and just fully carry it? Or should she say, you know what? No, you have some responsibility here. Or of course you're going to say something in between. But I mean, what's the proper, when someone is trying to, this is, you always say your doula trainings are about more than just doula work. They're about life. Being able to handle someone being upset with you. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about when someone's upset with you fairly. Mm-hmm. I mean, and those unfairly. Of us who are in relationships have arguments all the time where someone's blaming us for something that is totally fair, but we still feel defensive. We still feel angry. We still fight about it. And then there's another situation where someone is blaming you for something that's unfair. And what we're talking about here is, how do you carry? Should you carry? How do you carry? How do you respond when someone is blaming you for something that you feel
and I don't have
is not your fault?
Oops, sorry. I don't have the black and white answer to this. As we know, every individual is going to be different. I think that, and I didn't say exactly what the doula said because I'm not the doula, but what she told me was kind of what you just said, Sarah, was that she said to the client, I'm really sorry that this birth experience has turned out to be so hard for you to remember. I'm sorry that this is the perspective that you have on it. But then that's when she said, I do feel like I'm not responsible. You're not responsible. This is how it played out. I mean, she was nice in her. She acknowledged the perspective, but then didn't take the blame for it and didn't blame anybody else for it. So was that right? Absolutely, it was right, because that's what resonated as the truth to the doula. And if she said it in a non-defensive way, with, meaning the tone of voice is so important. It's what we talk about. How we communicate isn't just the words, it's our body language and our tone of voice. But she could have equally been right by saying, I am so, so sorry that this has been your experience. And I am sorry that you feel that I played a role in that, and I take responsibility for that sadness that you feel. And, I'm glad that you shared this with me, and I hope it helps having done that. And thank you. And then shut her mouth. She could have been, there's a book I read, which now you guys can read as well, called The Holy Man by Susan Trout. And it's just a very simple, beautiful book. And there's these different vignettes. Is that the right word? In the book. And one of them is called The Blame Keeper. And I always think of that. Sometimes it's just better to be the blame taker than trying to not be the blame taker. But
what was that book called again?
The Holy Man. It's not always right to be the blame taker, blame keeper. It is sometimes the right thing. So I think it's an individual decision. But here's what
I think it's a blurry line when you're talking about a business. When you're talking about an interpersonal relationship with a partner or a child, I could see a case for that. I think if you're talking about a business, it's tricky.
It is tricky, but here's and this isn't, we're not going to legalities, but quite a few years ago, I was listening to a symposium on lawsuits in the medical profession, and it was covering all malpractice professionals. I mean, all medical professionals and the malpractice insurance. And one of the things that has been shown statistically is if the doctor says, I'm sorry, to the client, to his patient or her patient, the patient is so much less likely to sue them. But it is totally against, they've been trained not to ever say they're sorry, because then they supposedly are taking blame for the circumstance. But there's a whole movement in the legal system of lawyers who are trying to instruct medical professionals to say they're sorry. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're acknowledging blame. You're just in essence saying, I'm sorry that you feel this way. Because most people just want compassion given back to them. And so if you can say, honestly, if in your heart you really don't feel like this doula, that she would not have done anything different. Of course she would do something different now, because now she's sitting months later hearing how traumatized the woman. The furthest thing from her mind would have been wanting this woman to be traumatized for up to a year. Of course she would do something different, but no, that's only hindsight that tells her that, not the actual situation. So if she can honestly say that, then if she prefaces it by acknowledging that was painful. This is what I had, and if my children ever listen to this podcast, know that this is true most of the time. And sometimes they'll say it isn't true. But usually when they're telling me perspectives on their lives of growing up with me and life experiences that I've had with them, of course our perspectives are going to be different. But if they tell me that this is what they remember, this really hurt, I try to rise to the moment of realizing that's their perspective, and it really does hurt. And
my kids are young enough that doesn't happen to me a lot yet, but I know it will. I mean, I know it will.
And it's you. But what I've come to understand is, but if I argue it, it's just creating more pain inside of them.
You know, I was just having this conversation with somebody at a party the other night. This dad friend of mine was saying, if my kid ever drags me to therapy and wants to talk about, I'm going to be like, I did so much for you and I was such a better dad. And I was like, you know what? No, you can't. You have to be like, I'm so sorry that was your experience. And you have to suck it up.
Well, because we all, so going back to the birth thing, it is that it's people want to be acknowledged for the pain that they're having. But to really finish with this particular story is that I never heard the client's story. So I cannot be the full judge and jury here, and nor do I ever want to be the judge and jury. But I think it was fairly obvious that this woman was just really struggling with the choices that had been made. And she was having a really hard time coming to accept her responsibility in the decision making. And she felt she needed to blame. And she wasn't just blaming the doula. She had some blame towards the midwife as well for not guiding her. And also, an aside to this story, this wasn't her first baby. She had the prenatal story also about her was that things had been done to her.
Yeah, like the other woman I was talking about. Yeah.
And so it kind of came together like, isn't this interesting? Totally different circumstances, different experiences with different people, and yet the common denominator in this story is her. And that's not to blame her either. It's just it felt, and I'm not a psychologist, I don't want to psychoanalyze her, but I'm wise enough about my own person to know that often we want to reach out and push it on to somebody else because we finding it very hard for ourselves to acknowledge that, shoot, I actually screwed up here.
Well, so this is actually leads right into my next question, which is, what if the doula did make a mistake? Right. Then what should you say? I mean, we talked about the options if you really feel like you're being unfairly blamed. And I would wager that for our listeners, if you're a doula long enough, this is going to happen to you in some form. You can, if you're the best doula in the world, there's going to be a misunderstanding. There's going to be a client who doesn't come back and you don't know why. You're going to hear that something was said about you. I mean, you know, I always think about, I've worked with a midwife that is beloved. I mean, 99.9% of people think she walks on water, and there's still people who think she doesn't, who don't like her, who claim something wrong was done to them or something bad. And, you know, and I don't know it doesn't really matter if it's true or not. The point is she's very, very well regarded.
Right. But she still has those stories.
She still has those stories. Gotcha. Everybody has those stories is the point I'm trying to make. So if this happens to you, I want you to take a deep breath and say, this is part of being an experienced doula.
Right.
There is almost no profession you could have in your life that wouldn't have some conflict in it arise.
Absolutely.
And the second thing I want you to do is take a deep breath and say, what was my actual role here? And so let's talk about when you think, oh, shoot. I actually, what they're saying is fair.
Right.
I really regret something. Do you hear stories like that?
Yeah. And I can even...
Do you hear it from... Because I know... So you're executive director of To Labor, which means very, very rarely, you know, doulas who are trained and certified through To Labor...
Actually, go ahead.
The training and certification process, you know, we believe is good, and we believe To Labor doulas are excellent. But every once in a long while, probably a mom is going to call you and with a grievance.
Right. When we have a grievance, we have a grievance policy and committee and process.
So fortunately, that doesn't happen often.
And unfortunately, what I was going to say is that though we have gotten those, never has the person actually been a member in good standing or certified.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
So the truth is we
okay.
can't really do much in that case.
Okay.
But
so if someone calls and says a doula who was trained by you, who's not certified or who's let her certification lapse, what are you going to do? You know, did me wrong.
So we,
you say, it's nothing to do with me, but take away that.
Right.
You hear these things. So what kind of things do you hear when you feel like, yes, actually the doula made an error here?
We had, and we did hear all sides of the story because that's part of the grievance committee. We went through the process even though this person was not a member in good standing at the time, nor certified. But we felt we wanted to hear, to mediate in some way. Without making this the long story, the family. The woman specifically felt that the doula was extremely absent from the labor and birth, that she let them know that when she went into labor that she said, I hope you can wait a few hours because this event was happening. Her boyfriend was in town and was going to be leaving in the next few hours. That's what the event was. It wasn't an actual event. I'm remembering the details as I'm talking. That the boyfriend was going to be leaving in the next few hours and they wouldn't be seeing each other, that he lived out of the area and wouldn't be seeing each other for X amount of time. First mistake, in my opinion, that the doula made is sharing about her personal life, about her boyfriend and how she didn't want to miss this time with him. That's not a place we put our clients. If you have already let your clients know about the birthday party that you knew you were going to not miss and the backup had all been set up, that's a whole nother topic, and I think we've talked about this, but we can talk about again about backup doulas and being on call and all of that. That's a different story. I mean, if the client calls in on the day that was pre-planned, that you weren't going to be available, then you would put the next steps into place. But this wasn't the case. So the mother said, immediately she felt like, she was a bother to the woman, and she would hold off calling the doula until that time had passed. Then when it did come time for her need to call the doula, it wasn't in that time frame of her boyfriend leaving. So the doula had to come in, and the labor, they were in the hospital, and the labor was slowing down and taking its time. And the client expressed that she was feeling very badly, that she knew that the boyfriend was still in town. And so she was getting wrapped up in the doula's life, feeling guilty about it. And then the doula, because things were going slow, was said to the mother and the father, I would like just to leave for about an hour to be able to say officially goodbye to him, and I will come back. And they said that was fine because they felt like they didn't want to be the cause of her missing out on being able to say goodbye to her. And sure enough, things started turning around while she was gone. She came back. Things at that point, she got an epidural because things had turned around and the doula wasn't there. And then the story goes on, and the doula, they felt, was very absent for the rest of the time, was very distracted, felt sad about the partner, the boyfriend. So in essence, the doula really had not done her job very well. And this family really did have a legitimate reason to be unhappy with the doula. And in the end, they chose the reason she was reaching out, the mother, was, she said, I just felt like this is not how I want other women to have an experience with a doula. She felt like it wasn't a good experience, and she wanted us to know that so that perhaps there was a way we could help this doula change or keep her from having other clients. So In this case, we heard the doula's point of view, and of course it was a little bit different. She had different times and different reasons for things, but she had to concede that, yes, the boyfriend was a part of it, and yes, she had acknowledged this, and yes, she had left, and that when she came back, the woman did have an epidural, and she felt very distant from the whole thing because she had missed an opportunity, and so we had to help her find a place of accepting that responsibility and then giving her the input that we felt that she owed these people an apology for doing what she had done.
So wait a minute. Had these people contacted her and she had not apologized until you?
Yeah.
So these people contacted her and said...
They felt like she had been and she was defensive. She was defensive. And until this process actually occurred... She was put on the spot, and this was one of the reasons.
So I wonder how much she could have.
She would have avoided.
I mean, she obviously would have avoided the whole grievance policy, but I wonder how much bad will she would have avoided just by saying she was sorry the first time.
Right from the beginning.
It's so hard not to be defensive. I mean,
so,
we all get it.
And this was that
it's
line.
It's almost harder sometimes when you know you did something wrong.
Well, that's what I was going to say. This is a case where she was being defensive. You brought it up in personal relationships, this was a professional, relationship, and she knew she had been at fault. She hoped she could slide under the radar with it. But when the family had expressed, what it came down to was they didn't want to pay her the remaining amount of the money.
Got it.
And she wanted the money. Mm-hmm. And she argued with them for the contract's sake. And I understand we believe in the contract. That's a whole different topic. But in this place, that's where it got to be a problem. And that's when they came to us to say, help us, because we don't feel like this is fair, that we're being asked to pay for something when she didn't really fulfill her place. And they actually said, we'll pay her, because we did have a contract and she was there when the baby came, but they felt like she was wrong in wanting the money.
Yeah.
So, and I understand the doula did her job. So she felt like she should have the money. So what do we do when we hear, if it doesn't come to a grievance policy or committee? This woman was pushed into a corner, kind of. Sometimes we just know it ourselves because the client says, I think you kind of dropped the ball there, or
right.
You weren't available to me, and you really feel like. I had a client, I was trying to remember how old this child probably is, about 18 years old now, probably in college, probably having a grand old life.
You've been a doula a long time.
But I do remember this was a really, really difficult birth. The client was a very difficult woman, very high professional mindset, like very controlling, thought she could control everything. 41 years old, first and only baby, a first baby, and what turned out to be her only baby. And her birth turned out to be just one of those classic one thing after another mm-hmm. to NICU with the baby, cesarean, everything. And that wasn't the problem. The problem was, and which she knew, was that the birth happened on Saturday and I was leaving on Sunday to go on vacation. And she mm-hmm. knew that wasn't, and I had a backup for the birth in case I was, mm-hmm. the baby came. And she got, I did the immediate postpartum with her before I left on Sunday. I went to the hospital to check in on her. And then this is where I was, I guess, to blame. I didn't have the backup person follow through with her in the postpartum because she hadn't been part of the birth.
Relationship.
And I just, in hindsight, I probably should have nonetheless. But, and this is pre-emailing, texting days. So I was going on vacation anyway. And back in those days, I actually went on vacation with my family and didn't do any work like I do nowadays. So though I thought of her, I didn't think of her because I was done. And then when I came back, this is where I erred. I wasn't in immediate contact with her to check in and see how she was doing. And life got busy, other births, my whole life. And I let her slide. And she contacted me months later and wanted to talk. And she had been hurt by my silence afterwards. And I felt terrible because she was absolutely right, Sarah. I had neglected her. And that was never my intention. I did not do it willfully and thought, I don't want to talk to her anymore. It just, I let it, I didn't follow through. And I had to tell her, I had to tell her how sorry I was, that she was right, that if I could do it over again, I would do it again. And she said to me at the end, Thérèse, I'm so grateful. Thank you. Thank you for just seeing my side of this and not arguing with me. And that's honest. That's honestly the story. And, I haven't thought about that story until we had this conversation come up. And it was really painful for me. I felt terrible. And that's when I needed to learn how to forgive myself.
That's the part I was going to bring up again, is that for doulas listening, part of this is feel. What did you say to me once when I was in a situation? Feel it, let it soak over you,
but don't wear it.
But then let it go. Take it off. I think you said feel it, wear it, wear the garment, and then take the garment off and burn it.
Yeah.
Which you said that to me in a similar situation when I really needed, because if you're a doula, you're probably a pretty caring, loving person.
Exactly.
And this is going to maybe get to us a little more than in another profession if someone says they're mad at you, because it's tied to what you love and what you believe in. But you have to, and we're not saying let it go right away. We're not saying someone calls you and by that afternoon you should be like, oh, well, did my best, moving on. You have to sit with it. You have to feel it. And then you have to burn the garment. You have to let it go.
It did inform me about the importance of staying in touch with somebody. It really did. I mean, I felt like I already knew that, but her experience really, and that's one of the reasons I talk about postpartum visits being so important, to follow through with 3 days postpartum, a week, following through that week, that second week.
I love that story too, actually, because when I hear it, I think, oh, well, yeah, you messed up. But I mean, come on, anybody could do that. It was an innocent mistake. It wasn't intentional. Anybody, you went to the hospital postpartum. She knew you were going on vacation. You did the best you could. And yeah, you let the ball drop, but your life got busy. It's like, it's so understandable. It's much more relatable than a story where a doula just does something horrible or totally out of scope. It's like, what happened to you could happen to anybody.
But what her response back to me was so important, that it really had affected her, and I had hurt her. Yeah. Because she felt connected to me, even though I didn't feel as connected to her.
Sure.
And her birth, she had left me out of some of her labor. Like, we had been talking on the telephone. I had seen them during the day. We had been talking on the telephone. She was staying home. We knew she was going to go into the hospital soon. She knew clearly prenatally and in our last conversation to call me before they went to the hospital so that I could be clear on what their plan was. And she called me I called them. An hour passed, which was our time to check in again. And an hour passed, and then an hour and a half passed, and I called them. And they were not answering their telephone. And because, again, this was pre-cell phone days, and they weren't answering their telephone. And so I knew where the hospital was, that obviously they were going, and I called, and I asked it for labor and delivery, and I asked for her room, and sure enough, they answered the phone. And I said, hey, and they go, oh, yeah, we decided to come in.
Yeah.
And it was such and it wasn't because they didn't like me.
Right.
It was just, this is who these people were.
Right.
So she wasn't a warm and fuzzy person for me.
So you felt like it was, you didn't have that.
I didn't. And I think that was my fault of not still doing the professional right thing. But it taught me, and it taught me to humble myself. And it was hard. I felt, you and I talked about this before we came on the air, that sometimes the reason I get calls from people, I think, is because I'm safe. Or did we say this on the air?
I think we said it here. Yeah.
We've been talking for a while.
But
I felt embarrassed, I felt some shame around it, and I didn't really want to. And back then there was no one to talk to about it except for my partner, to be able to tell him what I had, that. And, of course, he was more like, let it go. It's not a big deal.
Right.
But it was a big deal.
Right.
So.
Well, thank you for sharing it. And I mean, I would say out there, especially to more experienced doulas who have a local doula group, share these stories. Let people learn from.
Absolutely.
If you figured out something you did that doesn't work well, that hurts people's feelings, that something as silly as, when I was a new doula, I got this little Wonder Woman figurine because I thought, I'll show it to women when they're like in transition, and I'll say like, look, you're Wonder Woman, you're amazing. And the first time I ever did it, the woman was like, oh, look at those boobs. I'll never have boobs like that. And I thought, oh man, that's not what I wanted at all. I did not want to start
no more Wonder Woman.
A body shame spiral. And that's the kind of thing that's very easy to let go of. She actually was really pretty bummed. And it was like, I was like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. But it wasn't a big deal. And I was able to let that go. But tell stories of when, just like you tell good births, share stories of when you were able to face culpability that was deserved, and tell stories of how you handled it when someone was angry with you and you felt it wasn't deserved, because you will help newer doulas and colleagues grow.
Yes, and take the blame when you think you absolutely should take the blame, and sometimes take the blame when you really don't think you are, but it would help make that person feel better. And if you don't want to take the blame, don't be on the defensive. Be kind, acknowledge what they're feeling, and then move forward for yourself.
So I feel like you just gave me a little mini marriage counseling session, because all of the stuff you just said, I should apply not only in my doula work, but in my marriage. With that, we will leave you.
Yes.
We hope you have a great week.
Yeah, thanks,
I don't know
everyone.
Exactly when this will air, but it's all holiday season time. So
stay warm wherever you are.
Yes. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful week. Check out tolabor.com, our Facebook page. Leave us a review. Email us questions. If you want to email us a story of a time when you were blamed for something you think was or wasn't your fault, or you had a difficult interaction, or you were left feeling confused, I think, like I said, I think that our listeners learn just as much from mistakes as from things that went well. So ToRAISE Questions at gmail.com. Thanks, everybody.